Is that there are no videos embedded in tonight's lecture. YouTube has continued to be grumpy with us. So we have live performances, so no video stream, no videos interrupting the stream there. So I'm very pleased to introduce and have you welcome three singers going to be helping today. First, Kimberly Christie comes to us from the Baltimore area. And she's going to be joined by a mini chorus of our own Marty Clayton and my wife, Beth Bush. You know, it's one thing to watch a performance on the video, and they're very emotional and can be very effective, but there's a whole different level of engagement with music if you can hear it live, because you see directly what's involved in actually producing it, what was involved not only in Brahms writing it, but then the singers having to learn it and then to work together. So I'm so happy we have a chance to do it live tonight. All right, we're going to overview some of the broad themes, and we're going to be talking tonight about movements 4 and 5 of the Requiem. So, reminder, Brahms writes this Requiem after the death not only of Robert Schumann, but the death of his mother, Christiana. The material he's going to use is going to come from the German Protestant Bible, what was literally called Luther's Bible, because Luther did the bulk of the German translation of the entire Bible. And so the music and the passages and the text are going to all come from what could be considered a Protestant tradition as opposed to the Catholic tradition. Now, the Protestant tradition is going to go back 100 years or more before Brahms, back to J.S. Bach. He's going to be the first one to really create this Protestant liturgical music in his writing. Another German composer was Heinrich Schütz. So Bach and Schütz are going to start this tradition that Brahms is going to pick up with this German Requiem. So there's a couple words, musical words, it's probably good to increase your vocabulary on this. Remember, Reader's Digest always had that word power section. So one is the word cantata. And you might hear cantata tossed around, and in some ways, this Requiem is a type of cantata. Cantata comes from simply the Italian. It's just a fancy way of saying to sing, cantare. So cantata is a sung piece of music, but it usually involves soloists and an orchestra, and then it's set around certain particular texts. If it's shorter in its structure and sectional, then it was usually intended to be sung in worship. So there would be worship cantatas, sacred cantatas, but there were also secular cantatas. Bach and the others wrote cantatas for academic festivals or nobility that were visiting. So for somewhat arbitrary themes, they would compose these cantatas. Huh?
Bach's coffee cantata.
Yes, by the coffee ones. So they had both sacred and secular purposes. Bach ended up writing about 250 cantatas in the course of his career. And he was one of the first ones to truly write enough of them for the entire liturgical year. So his was kind of the foundation. Now, if you take a cantata and you expand it and center it around a broader theme, then you move from cantata to oratorio. And that's where you're going to get Messiah, Handel's Messiah, or Elijah. So a cantata is any vocal work intended for choirs, soloists, and instrumentalists. And then if it's larger, then it becomes an oratorio. So Brahms is in effect writing a type of cantata with his own text, soloist, choir, orchestra, but he's shaping it around the idea of the Requiem Mass. And so that's why he'll call it the German Requiem. All right.
So why is this not become a cantata? I mean, an oratorio? Because it seems like it's pretty.
It is, but oratorios tend to have one central theme, like Handel's Messiah all has passages around the Messiah, or Elijah, Mendelssohn's Elijah is all stories about just Elijah, and it is following a Requiem pathway, it's just not the Catholic Requiem version. And it was also the title he gave it, so I can't argue with him. He gets owner's rights.
Weren't oratorios performed in theaters, but cantatas in church?
I'm not entirely sure. Like Messiah.
I think that was a theater production.
Initially, yeah, but I mean, it's obviously morphed into church pieces, yeah. There was a lot of grumbling about Brahms' piece about whether it should be done in a church or not. Again, the people that weren't real happy with the Protestant tone thought and Brahms' piece never mentions Jesus. So he intentionally keeps it very broad in the text he chooses. So for that reason, some said, no, it should be in the concert hall, not in the church. Those are battles for, music impresarios, not for us, I guess. All right, back to the broad themes. Requiem, Mass for the dead. Brahms' focus is more for comforting the living. We talked about how Brahms' version starts with the Beatitude, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And then it moves into two movements that focus on the brevity of life, the shortness of life. And the baritone soloist gets up in the third movement, and he basically asks the question, Lord, teach me to know the measure of my days. Teach me to understand that my life is short. And then the soloist is going to end with the question, if my life is short, a mere hand's width in your eyes, O Lord, what is my comfort? And then the choir is going to come in with change of key with the melody and the text, my hope is in the Lord, our comfort is in God. So that's movements 1 through 3. We come today to movements 4 and 5. So this is the midpoint of the Requiem. And in this section, now the movement is not so much on blessed are those who mourn, and Lord, teach me to know the shortness, the measure of my days, to now describing the place to which our focus is focused on, the place that we are thinking about as we grieve those who mourn. So Brahms is going to write two movements. The fourth one in particular is going to try and refocus our attention from the shortness of life, the flowers that fade and the grass that withers, to now to look up and to say, how lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. He wants to give comfort to those who grieve by reminding them of the dwelling place that is the residence, in effect, of those who've died. So for this one, Brahms is going to use one of the Psalms. He's going to use Psalm 84. And it's a simple little psalm. It's subtitled Joy of Worship in God's Temple, if you look in the Bible for it. Now, in the psalm, when they're saying the dwelling of the Lord, they're actually talking about the temple, pretty much the temple in Jerusalem. But that temple was destroyed in 70 AD when the Romans came in and destroyed all of Jerusalem. And so over time, and particularly by the New Testament, the dwelling of God was not limited to the temple, but was expanded now to include the idea of heaven and a heavenly temple. So we're going to go to the first slide now, and it's on your books here. We're going to talk about the text a little bit. I'm going to read, I'll read the German for you, and the German, I don't know if it's on your sheets as well. You've got the German there as well. All right, so here's some words. Again, you have to get used to the German language because that's the way you'll hear it in performance. So, wie lieblich sind deine Wohnungen? How lovely are your Wohnungen, your dwelling places, your apartments, in effect. Herr Sabaoth. So Herr Sabaoth, Lord Sabaoth. Sometimes we'll say Lord Sabaoth in English, or we'll say Lord Sabaoth with an S. It's a transliteration of the Hebrew word for hosts, Lord of hosts. So there are all these different titles for God, Elohim, Yahweh. So Sabaoth is another title for God. God is Lord over all the heavenly beings, the Lord of hosts. Meine Seele verlanget und sehnet sich nach den Verhöfnungen des Herrn. My soul longs and senses, sighs after the courts. Ein Hof is could be a barnyard, it could be any enclosed area, and so a Vorhof is the area in front of it, or a courtyard. Mein Leib und Seele freuen sich in dem lebendigen Gott. My body, Leib, and Seele, soul, rejoice in the living God. Wohl dienen, praise to them that in your house wohnen, in deine Haus wohnen, in your house live. They praise you forever. And that's a good chunk of the psalm itself. So it's a pretty straight translation of that. All right, we're going to talk about the music a little bit, and then Kimberly's going to help us hear it a bit. Okay, I'm always wanting to know what key it's in. We started in F major. Remember, anytime the major keys are more upbeat, minor keys, when they're used, are usually either to convey an idea or because they're related to the major key. So we often would have F major and D minor, which are complementary or relative keys. Well, this one shifts. This is the first one into kind of a new key, but it's a major key. It's E flat major, which is a bright key. You know, F has a bright sound. G, E flat's a little more, a little darker, but it's still a major bright key. And it's in 3/4. So you all learn, 3/4s are waltzes, all right? Now we've already had one movement in 3/4 though, and that was the second movement, which was the funeral march. And it was a very plodding one with the timpani pounding, and you can almost see them 1, 2, 3 carrying a casket and literally going down the street. But normally a 3/4 is more upbeat. Remember, Brahms is German, and the Germans love their waltzes, and they love the Ländlers and the other folk songs. So this is a little more, it moves a little more. So you can hear a strong 1 and that 1, 2, 3 feeling. So even in describing God's dwelling place, there's a built-in almost exuberance or a joy in how he's characterized it. All right, that's enough of that. Let's try this. We're gonna do just the first page or so of this, and then I'm gonna talk a bit and we'll do the end of it. So. Now, we'd love to have her do more, but the reality is this whole piece was written for all 4 voices, so it's a mean trick to make Kimberly only sing the soprano part. But you get the feel for this. So out of that third movement where the baritone was wondering about, the shortness of life and what is my comfort, and then came that fugue to try and show God has things in control, now comes this first comforting melody, how lovely is thy dwelling places. And choirs will often sing this just as an anthem in church. It's a well-known separate piece. All right, then the middle of the piece shifts. You'll see in the text how my soul and body, my soul desires and longs for the courts of the Lord. And so there's this whole idea of yearning. If a musician wants to demonstrate this sensation of yearning, what they do is they create a dissonance and then they resolve it. The simplest one, for example, if I'm going to end a piece, and I might have I would hold this note and then come down. So that's a common pattern in music. To show the yearning, though, a lot of times in this piece, Brahms is going to do it with half steps. So there's even more tension built in. Let me show an example in here. Kimberly's going to does a little bit more in the last movement. Here's a part. Anytime the melody is going to move in small steps, it's meant to embody this sense of yearning and longing. So you'll hear some of that in this piece. You'll hear it even more in the next movement. Eventually, it's going to conclude with the statement, blessed are they who dwell in thy house. And then the movement's going to end with its own little mini fugue again. We're not going to play it or sort it out. It's a great choral piece. But again, it's this idea that our assurance is in the hands of God, and where human life moves along one pathway, God is able to watch more than one, is not befuddled by the complexity of life, and in fact, out of all the moving lines of our lives can create something beautiful. And so the fugue symbolizes that divine wisdom that holds the complexity of life together. All right, we're going to do the end of this movement here. Make sure I start in the right place here. So this is going to be the first word's going to be blessed are they, so blessed are them, and then, oh blessed they who in the house are dwelling, they praise thee evermore. She's going to go just the first part of the fugue. So that's the fugue part. They praise thy name evermore. And then everyone jumps on top of each other and all sings that together. All right, so that's the anthem. You need to go back and listen to that at home so you can hear the whole choral version of it. We're going to shift now to the fifth movement. We're going to talk a bit about, and we're going to do a bit of a digression. The fifth movement wasn't originally in the Requiem. The first time it was performed, it wasn't there. But he talked to Clara Schumann and he talked to some other people, and he wrote it later and then added it in fairly soon thereafter. And so it's a special movement, and it's not only special because of it being this addition, but because of how it's structured. Movement 3 had a male soloist standing there asking his questions of God. Movement 5 has a female soloist, and it's almost entirely a solo piece with the choir accompanying her. And she's speaking now about those lovely dwelling places. So it's almost as if you set up something abstractly, and then someone steps onto the stage and says, this is what it's like. And so you have a female voice talking about the place where she is. After a short time of pain and discomfort and grief, she has now been comforted, and she will see you again. Now, you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to figure out, this is Brahms' mother almost talking to him. And we'll see later built into it is also the chorus, also reassuring and saying the words, as a mother comforts those she loves, so I shall comfort you. All right, but let's look at the text. So slide 2, Eric, we're going to do that. We'll do the German first, and then you can see the English up here. Ihr habt, this is on the purple sheets, ihr habt nur Traurigkeit. You have sorrow. Traurig is to be sorrowful. Aber ich will euch wiedersehen. All right, let's do your German here. If you say hello in German, or good day, it's what? Guten Tag, right? So if you're going to leave someone, what do you say for goodbye? Auf Wiedersehen, right? So Auf Wiedersehen doesn't really mean goodbye. It means until wieder, again, sehen, I see you. So until I see you again. Now that Wiedersehen is going to be a critical word then in this movement, because that's what's going to be sung. You have now sorrow, aber ich will euch wiedersehen. I want to see you again. And then our hearts shall rejoice, and your joy shall be such that no one can take it away from you. And then it says, look at me, I had only a small amount of time, kleine Zeit, Mühe und Arbeit gehabt. I only had a small time of work, and Mühe is weariness and burden. And I have found Trost. I've been comforted. I've found a comfort. And then I will comfort you as a mother comforts. So built into that. Now, the reason the English is a little different is the English didn't fit with the German. So the English translators had to stick in the words grieve not to line it up melodically. So a lot of times, and you hear it in the German, the emphasis is on that word Traurigkeit, sorrowful, and it gets moved over to the English grieve not. But the idea is still the same. I will again behold you, and then your heart will be joyful. So the reason I put that in brackets, this is, yes. So that's the beauty of what Brahms did and created here. All right, John 16:22. I'll circle through to that. John 16:22 is the "you are now sorrowful" bit. "I will comfort you" is actually Isaiah 66. So what happens is Kimberly, as the soloist, will sing, almost as Brahms' mother, "You are now sorrowful, but I will see you again, Wiedersehen, and I will comfort you." And then like the Greek chorus, Marty and Beth sing, "As a mother comforts," as I will comfort you as one whom his own mother comforts. So Kimberly never sings that line. Kimberly never acknowledges I'm a mother comforting, but the Greek chorus, literally the chorus, are the ones saying, "As a mother comforts, so you shall be comforted." So you see what Brahms has done. He's created the soloist who's offering words that actually Jesus spoke, the promise, now you have a bit of sorrow, but you will see each other again, and then the Isaiah passage. All right.
I still don't understand who I is. It would be Jesus?
In this case, it came from Isaiah, so in this case, it would be God.
In the first one?
Yeah, in the brackets, that I will come.
Because that sounds like a person
Yeah.
recognizing that we'll see each other in heaven.
That's Jesus speaking in John 16.
John 16, the first line, "You are now sorrowful, but I will again behold you." That's Jesus speaking to the disciples at the Last Supper.
Okay.
And then the second line is Isaiah, so it's God speaking. "I will comfort you as a mother comforts her child."
And then the last one, that sounds like the person who died.
No, so that goes back to Jesus. That's why I bracketed it. But although, frankly, that also comes from Ecclesiastes. This is where Brahms did a little bit of shuffling the deck here.
The person who suffered for a little time is not the person who died, but the person who's grieving.
So let's start with the first one. So John 16, John 16 is Jesus at the Last Supper, all right? So we stand with and John has Jesus talk a whole bunch at the Last Supper. There's 5 chapters of him doing a narration. So while he's talking to the disciples, Jesus is going to say to them, this is the part where he says, "Let not your hearts be troubled. I go to my Father's house, there are many dwelling places, and I go to take you with me." So then he looks at them and he says, "You are now sorrowful, but I will again see you, and then your hearts will rejoice." So that comes from that narrative. Underneath that, at the same time, Brahms has put in Isaiah's words about how God comforts us. And like the Lord says, "I will comfort you." To flesh it out, though, Brahms took a line from the Apocrypha, Ecclesiasticus. Ecclesiasticus is one of the longest books in the Apocrypha, the in-between materials between the 2 testaments, which were included in Luther's Bible. So he pulls out one verse, and that verse says, "Look upon me, I suffered for a little time, toil and labor were mine, and I have found at last comfort." So that is an unknown narrative, but speaking about how that person has found comfort in God. So Brahms isn't as worried about the narration, who are the sources, as much as just the concept. God comforts, and he uses in the promise of Jesus as well. All right. So this raises the bigger question around heaven itself. And so we're going to talk about that for a little bit. So far, all the discussion in this Requiem has been more about relationships than on places, on locations. From the very beginning, blessed are those who mourn. So you're offering the beatitude. It's a relational category. And then it talks about, well, how lovely is thy dwelling place? But it doesn't tell you what the dwelling place looks like. It just says it's a great place where God is and all of God's creatures, the hosts, heavenly hosts, all praise God. So all that language is more about the relationship. So that's why I gave you on the backside of this a whole bunch of references to heaven. People often assume that the Bible talks clearly about heaven, but it actually doesn't. It doesn't say it nearly as clearly as people sometimes have said, or, we've all seen St. Peter at a gate with a big book, and we've seen streets of gold and all those depictions. But mostly the Bible talks about heaven in terms, as I said, of a relationship. So John 16 is the first one. A little while you will no longer see me, and again a little while and you will see me. So that's literally in John. You have pain now, I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you. So that's comes straight out of John's gospel. The second one, sorry, let's shift to those. Eric, we have those slides. Do one more. There we go. So this was Jesus at the Last Supper, all right? So that's where Brahms is going to start for this. Now go to the very next one, Eric. We assume that then heaven is, the Bible reminds us heaven is not just for one group of people, not just for one language or one period in history, but as this is Luke describing Jesus talking, says, people will come from east and west, from north and south, and will eat in the kingdom of God, and some who are last will be first, and some are first who will be last. So now you get this idea of heaven as this place of diversity, of all these different people coming from all over, and they're eating together. They're sharing fellowship around the table. Let's go to the next one. When Jesus does talk about heaven, though, he does mention things like a house. My Father's house, there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? So now he's speaking spatially, but he doesn't go into any details about what this house is like. And he sure doesn't say there's one for Presbyterians and one for Baptists and one for Catholics. But then he says, I will come again and I will take you to myself so that where I am, there you may be also. So again, the emphasis is not so much on the architecture, but on the relationship. Next slide. This same pattern is followed in the Apostle Paul's writings. Now, we keep forgetting or routinely forget that Paul's writings are earlier than the Gospels, even though they're after them in the Bible. But Paul's going to be writing anywhere from 30 to 50 years earlier than the Gospels. So Paul's the first one to try and put the Christian faith in language that's teaching people what they needed to know about Jesus. So one of the questions Paul was always asked is, why should we worship Jesus? Why should we believe in the resurrection when people are still dying? What does it mean that those that are faithful and good people are still dying? Christ hasn't come back. How do we reconcile that? So the Corinthians were one of the churches that Paul wrote a lot about this to them. On your sheets, I have 1 Corinthians 15. This is actually the next one. 1 Corinthians 15 is a whole long speech from Paul. And he says, some may ask, how are the dead raised? What kind of body will they have? And he says, oh, foolish one, fool. What you sow doesn't come to life unless it dies. The perishable must put on imperishability. The mortal must put on immortality. So again, there's no description of heaven in terms of what it's like. It's almost a scientific discussion. You have perishable, and now you have to become imperishable. You have mortal, and now you're moving to the realm of what's immortal. So Paul's going to shape the discussion in those categories, and then he's going to move on, and this is kind of similar to the language in the fifth movement. He says, this slight momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory. So where you had perishability and imperishability, now you have temporal and then eternal. An eternal weight beyond all measure. What can be seen as temporary, what cannot be seen as eternal. We know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. He's using a building metaphor, but he's talking about the body, right? The earthly tent we live in, it's a metaphor for a tent, a big storm comes up, a tent blows over. A tent isn't a permanent structure. Our bodies are not permanent structures. So Paul's talking about the human body as if it's a tent. If this earthly vessel, this canvas, temporary physicality, if that's destroyed, we receive then a new being, a building from God, a house not made with hands, one that's eternal. Now remember, Paul's a Greek. He's writing, he's speaking to a Greek audience. He's a Jewish Pharisee, but he's communicating the philosophy they would understand. So he moves this whole discussion about heaven to these philosophical categories about eternalness. All right, you with me? So far, almost everything in the Bible about heaven doesn't really go into details about it concretely. So the question becomes, well, where'd we get all the other stuff, our ideas about heaven? And that's mostly from the book of Revelation, which is a fascinatingly complex book, much abused over the years. Revelation was meant to be a book of comfort. It was meant to encourage people. It was a pastoral book written in times of trial when they were being persecuted. So if you try and read it like a secret code, a decoder ring for the mysteries of the eternity, you're going to be running rampant over its intent. It was intended to give people encouragement and hope in a time of persecution. However, they do mention details. So trying to get their idea across, they'll say in the book of Revelation about streets of gold. It's one little bitty verse. It's a passing poetic reference. It was not meant to be a blueprint. It talks about gates made out of precious stones. They're just trying to find some metaphor, some analogy to capture something that was beyond human conception, the splendor of it. Again, it's not a blueprint. But there is a famous part near the end of it. So we'll go to the Revelation slide. So the very end of Revelation, after all, it's written during a time of persecution, Roman persecution, and then later even Jewish persecution. When all the dust settles, the idea comes forth, and the vision is said, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. Now, that's pulling on the Jewish language. Remember the book of Genesis. The earth was formed by separating the heavens above and the heavens below, and then they created the planet in between. So now a whole new heaven, a whole new universe, a new earth is created. The sea was the symbol of chaos. That's why the waters had to be parted at creation. So the sea is no more. Chaos is no more. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. The home of God is among mortals. They will be God's peoples. God will be with them. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying, pain will be no more. The first things have passed away. So for all of you that were quite hopeful of a nice estate with a big yard and a lot of property, heaven is, if it's described as anything, it's described as an urban setting. All right? So you have to get used to that. It's meant to be a place where there's people. So not only are they eating together, but they're living together. So we have to figure out how to live together on earth as it is in heaven, basically. That's the closest as the Bible's going to get to language about heaven. They will talk about in terms of diverse people, relationships, and that we're together. We're meant to be a community, the city of God. Augustine will use that phrase later. So that's a digression, but the point was Brahms is trying to capture that spirit in these movements. So what's going to happen is he's going to first say, how lovely is thy dwelling place. Get your focus on this place of God's dwelling. But then he personalizes it and gives us the female voice, the soloist, to sing and to tell us what it is, what it's like. And it's not described at all, but other than to say, I will be there, we will see each other again, and I will comfort you. And then the chorus will reassuring them, I will comfort you as a mother comforts her child. Right? There are several places in the Bible where God is given feminine attributes, and this is one of them. So it's always good to hold on to those. All right, so that's kind of the bulk of what's happening in Movement 5. I'm going to bring up Kimberly here, and I told her I'd put her on the spot. So, so Kimberly learned this movement. She learned it in the English. So I want to just say a few words, kind of what it's like to learn it. I mean, to sing it. What's all's involved for you?
Sure. So when I'm learning a piece, I like to start at the piano, just with the notes and the rhythms, not listen to any recordings, so I can not have anything in my head, but just look at what's on the page. And so looking at it, my first things are, well, we've got some tritones, we've got a lot of accidentals. If you're just doing the melody, you're like, okay, there's places this doesn't go where you think it's going to go. And it's a bit difficult. Once you start listening to the piano, you find that Brahms really leads you there all the time. And so once you've got that support of the piano, it's not that difficult in terms of notes and rhythms. What is difficult is that it's sustained. It's supposed to be very slow and sustained and floaty, and I see it as like an angel, kind of above the chorus, just there to float above and to provide comfort and to be constant peace. But I do love these parts where we have these accidentals and we have this da 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 da, and you get these sad little moments, and they're very cutting, and that's where you see, that death is obviously brutal and people mourn and it causes great sorrow. But the beauty and the peace is that you will see each other again, and that person who has passed on is comforting you even from beyond. So while most of it is very floaty and beautiful, we do have these cutting images that come through, and I love singing them. I like to put some straight tone on those and really, give them a little extra bite. But overall, it's a beautiful piece to sing, and almost operatic at some times, that you get to, it just really builds so beautifully, especially with the chorus at the end, the way we all build together and we have this beautiful climactic part at the very end that you will hear. So I really enjoyed. Thank you for giving me this opportunity
Sure.
to sing it.
Can you explain an accidental?
Oh, so an accidental is a sharp or a flat or a note that is not within the key signature. So something that so if I do C major, there are no sharps, there are no flats, it's all white keys. But if I'm doing a piece that's in C major and suddenly there's an F sharp or a C sharp, that's an accidental, something that would not typically be in that key signature.
It's a funny term, but it's an accurate term. It's like, oh, was that an accident? Did you mean to hit that note?
That was fun.
But they're very intentional. So
Yes.
it's anytime you change the main key to make a point musically, in effect. And so you'll hear Kimberly do certain movements like that. And remember, one of those key words is the people who Traurigkeit, who are sad, who are mourning. And that's how Brahms captures it. Brahms took some grief for they were amazed and appreciative, but it was bold, the harmonies and what he was doing musically. Remember, he's pushing the boundaries a bit with this type of piece.
Didn't Bach not use accidentals?
Oh, sure. All the composers have used accidentals. But as Kimberly's pointed out, the complexity of what Brahms is doing underneath musically, coupled with the choir, and then you've got this soloist on top of it. And Kimberly has to sing quite high so that her voice carries over all of the choir. So he's layered it, but it all comes together.
And he's kind of flirting with other keys sometimes. He doesn't
Yeah.
quite go there, but yeah.
Remember, the person after Brahms, they're going to go in two pathways, and one pathway is going to lead to Wagner. And Wagner will write for 30 minutes before he finally lets you know what key he's in. He doesn't like to end it, so he'll just keep it going and going and going. So Brahms does little hints of that, but not as extreme as his successors. And then, right after Wagner, you're going to get to the modern 12-tone composers in the early 20th century. So, I mean, literally within a span of 20 years, music was transforming itself. And within 50 years after this, you're in totally modern music. So, shall we do this? I think we're a good time, but we can take a few more questions here. So this is movement 5. You now who are sorrowful. So you can follow the English. It's there on your sheets.
Oh, shoot. Hey.
Yeah. Thank you all. So again, remember how the first movement ended with that harp going up to heaven. The last page is just so powerful. Here's the mother saying to the son, I will again see you. I will behold you again. I will behold you. And the chorus is saying underneath, I will give you comfort, comfort. Those are the final words. And I talked about how when there's tension and then you want to resolve it, that's the way Brahms crafted that whole ending. So the very end, Kimberly was singing just back and forth in these two notes, coming down. They're very close, but underneath it is a chord. You want to end up with a G chord. So Brahms puts in, you hear one resolution, and then it comes down one more note to the G, and then ends. So even the music is, and it ends up high as if your thoughts go back up to heaven. So even the music shows that desire, that longing, that we'll be comforted and finally be at peace. So it's a beautiful piece. As I said, it wasn't in the original, but it serves an incredibly grounding effect. So to kind of look ahead, there are only two more movements. We'll look at them both next week, the last two movements. This one we're going to need this one we have to show videos because it gets crazy. All the orchestra kicks in movement 6 because there's a huge fugue there as well. But now we have the question, blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted. Lord, teach me to know my days. You are my comfort. How lovely is thy dwelling place. The mother figure saying, I will comfort you. Now then it gets defiant with Scripture. And it comes back to other writings of Paul with the question of, in 1 Corinthians 15, in that day, in the resurrection, in that time of completion, then death is defeated. O death, where is your sting? O death, where is your victory? The victory is in Christ Jesus. So Brahms is going to take that passage, but he's going to bring out all the trumpets and all the brass, and they're going to be shouting, literally, death, where, whoops, it's very dramatic. Death, where is thy sting? And then it's going to go into a huge fugue, again, as if showing God's wisdom, God's reason and power is going to be triumphant. That's the big movement 6. But he doesn't end with that one. Movement 7, he's finally going to come back to where most of the requiems had started. And in movement 7, he's finally going to start and sing the words, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord, for they rest from their labors and their work shall follow them. So having started with those who mourn, he finally ends with blessing the dead. And again, brings it back. It's a quiet movement, and it ends up with the harps coming back and moving up towards heaven. So it's a beautiful overall piece. You'll see the fieriness of the confident faith challenging death's power, and then the reassurance finally for blessed are those who have died. All right, so that's what we have for next week. So any other questions? All right, can we thank Kimberly and Beth and Marty one more time? Good. All right, thank you all. We will see you then next week.